Okay, happening right now, federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is speaking to reporters following a meeting with members of the Amalgamated Transit Union Canada to discuss safety on public transit.
Transit is a fundamental, important part of daily life, and people shouldn't be afraid to take it. On top of that, the people who work on transit shouldn't be afraid, shouldn't live in fear, and shouldn't be the subject of violence as well. So we are proposing a number of initiatives to take this very seriously. We want to make sure people in the city of Toronto, when you get on a subway or a streetcar or a bus, if you work in transit, if you're a transit worker, whether you ride transit or you work in transit, you should be safe. You have the right to be safe. And so the national president and the local president and the organization of transit workers have come up with a number of recommendations of what we can do to keep people safe. And we want to endorse those recommendations and call for some specific actions right now. The first thing we need to do to make sure people are safe in our city here in Toronto and across the country is to have an emergency fund to support an emergency operational fund for transit workers. This is to ensure that we've got the right level of staffing to provide the supports to keep people safe, whether that's guards or collectors, whether that's making sure that we have social workers or mental health workers. We need to have an emergency operating fund in place to secure the number of staffing so that people aren't afraid to be at night on transit for workers that are on transit. You know, the president asked a question of about 10 or 15 workers. They asked how many workers had experienced some form of violence. Every single person raised their hand. We need to end that. On top of that, we want to support the initiative of having a national task force that's tasked with the job of coming up with ongoing strategies around how do we keep people, both workers and the riders, safe on transit. So we want a national task force to that effect. We need emergency additional funding for shelters, to support people that are homeless, for mental health and addiction supports. We heard so many stories that for people that have nowhere to go, have no home, to find a place that's warm and that's keeps them dry, they end up taking a fare and riding the subway all night, or riding the subway car, or riding the streetcar all night, or riding a bus all night. That should not be a makeshift shelter for someone who can't find housing, and it shouldn't be that workers are left dealing with the crisis that people are going through that don't have housing. So we need emergency funding for mental health, for addictions, and for shelters. We also know that for people that are working in the subway and for riders of the subway, people don't have cell phone service. Now, this is an easy fix because those telecommunication companies literally need to flip a switch and you would have cell phone access in subways. So we want to force telecommunication companies with the powers that we have at the federal level to make that happen. These are some concrete steps to keep people safe. These are concrete things we can do. In addition, and finally, we know that there needs to be a provision that includes all transit workers in the criminal code, that they should be protected with additional sanctions if they are the subject of any offense. If a transit worker, any transit worker, is in any way assaulted or the subject of any criminal offense, that should be treated as very serious, and it should be given the importance and respect it deserves. Those workers should be given the importance and respect they deserve, and it should be treated as a serious offense. And so these are some of the recommendations that we've heard. We want to endorse those recommendations. Having spoken with some of the workers today, I think this is the right thing to do for workers. It's also the right thing to do for riders to make sure people are safe. And so these are some of the things that we're announcing today in coordination and in full support of both the local president and the national president that are here with me today. I want to thank you all for being here, and with that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Okay, we'll take questions, one question and one follow-up. We'll start with Randy Tonez now.
So Torontonians have been discussing a lack of transit facilities for years.
So first, I just want to acknowledge how serious this is. We've heard story after story. We heard of a 16-year-old kid in Surrey that was stabbed. We heard about family members here in Toronto that are losing their loved ones to violence on transit. Workers that are the subject of violent threats and assaults. This has to end. Workers and riders should be able to get on public transit and not have to worry. Parents shouldn't have to worry about their kids getting on public transit. Parents that need to go to work or need to pick up their kids from school should be able to ride public transit without any fear. And workers should be able to go into work wherever they work, whether they're working on the maintenance side, on the support side, on the admin side, or if they're operators. Workers should be able to go to work and come back home safe at the end of the day. That's what we're talking about today, with some concrete emergency immediate steps to alleviate some of the pressures, to deal with the immediate crisis with additional supports for operational services, and then to look at some of the long-term solutions we need to support people that are dealing with homelessness or mental health or addiction. So we're calling for concrete steps. It's not enough to be like the Liberals who are thinking that this is fine, the way things are, nothing is needed, no action is needed, and the Prime Minister has the power to do something and refuses because he doesn't think it's serious. Or we got Conservatives that are crying about the problem but not providing real concrete solutions that actually support the workers. What we're calling for is a real concrete set of actions that are going to support both workers and the riders.
So how would the emergency fund help people with mental health crisis?
So what we're calling for is an emergency operating fund that would fund more staffing levels at TTC, for example, and other transit and public transit facilities across the country. So when we're talking about providing supports, when you're walking around, when you're on a subway late at night and there's only one operator, how is that person going to deal with someone that's going through a mental health crisis or dealing with homelessness? We need additional people, additional workers, whether that's guards, that's social workers, mental health workers, additional TTC staff. We heard a lot of concerns about people calling in to a supervisor for support, but the supervisors there's not enough available to respond to the needs. There's not enough communications available. So we're talking about an emergency injection of funds to be able to respond to the needs that we're hearing from people on the ground here at this local facility, but across the transit system in Toronto and across public transit across the country.
All right, that's federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh speaking about safety on transit.